Want to be a part of our show? Send us a voicemail via our brand new 24/7 hotline for our podcast. Dial 845-208-5677. That's 845-208-5677. And your message could be featured in the next live episode of the Mets Weekly Podcast. Pete Alonso's free agency that has finally come to a close, and to a happy close. This has been quite the experience, quite the draining experience that we're happy is over. And let's just give a little recap of the long road back home. The Mets signed him to a 2-year, $54 million contract. Will Salmon on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, said that the Mets were offering Alonso a different 3-year deal. Obviously, he took the 2-year deal. The 3-year deal was $71 million, $27 million in the first year, and $22 million in the second and third years. Instead, Alonso chose the higher first-year value that came with the 2-year deal, and of course, $30 million, including a $10 million signing bonus. As for the other contract details, $20 million base salary for 2024, $27 million CBT luxury tax hit, as it is $27 million AAV, a 2024 player option for 2026, $30 million in accumulated cash, and it would be for 2026 if he were to opt into that second year. Now, if you are including arbitration salaries, AAV of $27 million puts Pete Alonso second right now, or tied for second in AAV with Freddie Freeman. He is second behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which is $28.5 million, but again, he has not hit the free agent market yet. We're expecting him to get to the $30 million a year possibility. Is it possible at the trajectory of his career that is an overpay in AAV? Most likely. They did not overpay in years, which seemed like to be the hesitant thing with not just the Mets, but the overall feel of the free agent market, where teams were just reluctant to give him a long-term deal. Now, as for Steve Cohen, he did tell John Heyman of the New York Post about the ending resolution of these negotiations, saying that I wanted to humanize the negotiations. I wanted him to hear it straight from me. Two humans having a conversation. I was clear. I told him, I want you back. We want you back. And that it seemed like that was the words that stuck with them, and they were able to find common ground in this deal. I would say that if you're looking at this from an overall standpoint of this contract, I don't know if this is how you feel, Frank. I feel like both sides, they won in the best way possible that they could at the amount of time that this was taking from the very beginning. We know where he's going to play this year. We don't know what his future is holding. But I would say that right now, this is the best case scenario for both sides after a very, very long stage of negotiations that even Steve Cohen publicly put on notice a few weeks ago.
I would say, considering the Blue Jays were the other team in the mix, I do think it is nice the Mets were able to pull off this deal because we know that Toronto is willing to spend a lot of money. So for them to still get him, and like you said, they overpaid with money and not with years, which I feel like that is the Steve Cohen advantage, that you can do that, where like other teams that are so concerned with money that they might go extra years when they really don't want to, just so they could kind of not have that same AAV. So that was nice. The Mets were able to still get that done. And I think the big thing for me is that we obviously saw Pete pressing this season. I mean, there was no doubt about it. I feel like it really goes to show, like with his numbers, like with men on base. So it felt like the more they needed Pete, the more that he struggled. So like the more pressure that was on, the more pressure he put on himself, and he was not able to be successful. So what I'm hoping is that with him having this opt-out, that he could use it as a little bit of a fallback plan to, like, let's say he doesn't have to really worry so much this year, because even if, things don't go well, he still does have a contract for next season. So like, it's not this year is the be all end all like the way it was last year. And honestly, it might be better for Pete to opt in, because then he doesn't have to potentially compete with Vlad on the free agent market. Because let's say that Pete opts in, Vlad gets signed, then Pete goes free agency the next year, and then he could be the top first baseman available. Instead of you battling with Vlad, you have Josh Naylor available. So I feel like for Pete's sake, there definitely is another way that he could still be more productive and not have to put as much pressure on himself. So I really am hoping that having like that second year available to him, whether he chooses to opt in or not, should help him out altogether. Instead of the Mets just giving him like 1 year 30 and that's it, the fact that there still is that potential chance of a second year if he does have another season where he's not quite his caliber player, because it wasn't just this season. I mean, we saw his struggles, but still 2023 was not as good as 2022. So if you continue to see him not being able to be close to that number, that threshold, then again, it might make more sense for him to opt in. So it is going to be very interesting to see what happens on both sides. And, we'll get to our lineup configuration later on, but you would also think that like having someone the caliber of Juan Soto should make him better. I mean, it really should.
It should.
He's going to have a lot of opportunities. I mean, he really is. You have a guy that is like historic when it comes to getting on base at the top of that lineup. You have MVP caliber player Lindor at the top of that lineup. So he's going to have a lot of opportunities. So if he wants to make, the big payday, I mean, this is the kind of team that he could do it with.
Right now, if you look at it from both angles and both sides, because both sides in these negotiations seem to be far apart for quite some time, but both sides kind of get a second chance at life right here. And I think that that's kind of the view that I give to it, as to where Pete Alonso, even if it turns out to be a year like 2024 was for him, he still obviously has that pillow of a contract as to where he doesn't have to compete with, the Vladimir Guerrero Jr., where, he's going to get term and Pete probably won't because he's going to be 31 years old. The Mets, on the other hand, the lineup gets deeper. They can build this around instead of a like 2-man nucleus, they can make it a little bit more of, with this power protection, like a 4-man nucleus, if you want to include somebody like Vientos in there. And you talk about even if Brandon Nimmo were to able to bounce back and, be able to be healthy. But when it comes to the overall, look of the lineup, it definitely got better. I said it from the very, very beginning, and I feel like it's become a little misconstrued from the way that we've talked about these negotiations, and I understand that it sounds like it. I'd say that, the way that we have kind of talked about it, it really just came from a very exhausting point. It really did not really come from, we just are not fans of Pete. Listen, I don't know what angle Andrew was coming from. He's not here to talk of what angle he was coming from. I said it from the very beginning. I would welcome Pete back with open arms, but it's going to have to be on the Mets' terms. And it seemed like the Mets, they gave in a little bit. There is a look of the AAV that it seemed like there was some common ground there, but the overall years, it seemed like Alonso really had to come down on them. The Mets kind of sweetened it a little bit with the high AAV deal. I was not expecting $27 million to be the luxury tax hit if they were to bring him back. I was expecting like $24 million, $23 million. So it definitely looks a little bit more overwhelming compared to what I was expecting in overall AAV, considering, age as a non-factor, because of course age is the main reason as to why you get these long-term deals. And that's the main reason as to why there was such a hesitant on Pete Alonso. A good deal from both sides right now. And, some way they were going to have to overpay. And I feel like at one point, they were going to come together just because of how this market is looked at. It really wasn't anything of he wanted to be a Met or he wanted to stay here, what he wanted to, we could hear that all we want. I feel like if he desperately wanted to be a Met, it would have gotten done a lot quicker than it did. I don't really care if he wanted to be a Met or not. Personally, I just want to see the team play. I just wanted it over. Like, that was it. That was all I wanted. My goal was I wanted this thing over before spring training started, even pitchers and catchers started, and it was over. That was it. That was all I wanted. Didn't really care how it ended. Didn't care where he went. I just wanted the thing over. Luckily, the Mets do get the advantage in this point as to where they can re-sign him. He doesn't go to the Blue Jays or the Angels. That was the biggest win of this one. I don't have to see Brett Beatty start for the New York Mets on opening day. Unless something traumatic happens during spring training, Vientos will be at third. Pete Alonso will be at first. Want to be a part of our show? Send us a voicemail via our brand new 24/7 hotline for our podcast. Dial 845-208-5677. That's 845-208-5677. And your message could be featured in the next live episode of the Mets Weekly Podcast.